today. So I'm going to share some slides, and our panel members will also share the link in the chat for you, so that you have these slides available to you so that you can go back through. We're going to be sharing a lot of high-level information today, and then there's an opportunity for you to provide feedback in the feedback form that is linked in this slide deck. So we want to make sure you have that, not only for this session, but outside of this session, when you have a chance to kind of think through what you heard and what you'd like to see going forward. I'm Kara Trenkamp, and I'm excited to speak on behalf of the larger work group today, and have some partners here to speak with us. I'm going to kick it off, but we also have with us Matt McGoldrick, who's going to share pieces around the structure and some of the slides, and also Brian Beaubien, who has been working in this space for quite some time, and will share some of the instructional models. Alan Goodwin is with us here today as well. He has been tasked with spearheading this group, and has been doing a great job of keeping us on task and running the central office work group that started early in January. So we are here as representatives of the larger work group to kind of to share the current thinking that's been gathered, and then collect your input and your voice as we go forward. So I'm going to start for a minute by sharing kind of the guiding parameters of what we've been tasked with, what Montgomery County Public Schools is thinking about in terms of an MCPS virtual school. It's important to note that this is not new to Montgomery County. We already have students who enroll and participate in taking classes online for a number of reasons, whether it be the former home and hospital teaching, now IIS, for credit recovery, for grade improvement, for health and foundations of technology, or that select course that is not available in the school for whatever reason. It could be a foreign language or a math class. So we already have a large offering of virtual courses, and we do have a virtual program. And so this work is really taking what we've learned from all of those experiences, what we've learned from this past year, and what we're learning across all of our stakeholder groups, including our external partners and other districts that have already been doing this work, in order to make a more comprehensive program. So with that in mind, Montgomery County Public Schools is looking at focusing a more robust program for students in grades 4 through 12. We know that there are some students in pre-K through grade 3 who will need a virtual program for reasons like for health reasons, for IIS. That will still be available. So we know that we have to continue to provide that, but a more comprehensive, robust program focused at grades 4 through 12 is really where we're focused our priorities right now. Another guiding parameter is around providing flexible schedules. So we've heard stories over this past year around the start time. So, some people wanting an earlier start time, some people enjoying the later start time. We've also heard stories around students that have needed to work during part of their days, or students who needed to take care of siblings, or students who participated in an internship. Thinking beyond the traditional school day is something that really needs to be a part of the guiding parameters around any plan that is put forward. The third guiding parameter is really ensuring success for all students. So we know that we've heard stories over the past year in particular around students who have benefited from being in the virtual space. We've heard cases where students have been able to use technology in ways that they have not been able to use in the past, that has allowed them to overcome challenges and barriers. So that's true for our special education students. It's particularly true for our speakers of other languages. and all students. And so we also have heard stories where those experiences have been very challenging over the last year, where the learning environment did not meet the needs of some special education students, some speakers of other languages, and other students. So we want to ensure success of all students by paying very careful attention to the structures and scaffolding to ensure that everyone is able to access virtual learning if they so choose or if they need. And then the final guiding parameter is that we will stand something up in the fall of this upcoming school year, in the 2021 school year. So this coming fall, something will be available, which is not as scary as it sounds, because we already do offer quite a lot of things. So, and you'll get to hear a little bit about that as we go forward. But we are looking at a phased in approach that we'll talk about in the slide deck, so that we can get our feet on the ground. We can be very thoughtful. We can partner with all of our stakeholder groups. There are a lot of conversations that still need to take place this is the first of many with our school leadership and school partners. We have our union partners. We're working with MCCPTA. And so we're looking at an iterative process where we gather some input, create some draft thinking, put that up, again, collect that input, and again, reiterate through that drafting process. So please know that what you're seeing and hearing today is draft. And you know that the purpose of the phase-in is to ensure that we work in collaboration with the different stakeholders, and we really think through some of the real challenges that you're going to raise in this presentation today, and that we're going to ask for in the feedback form. So we shared a little bit around the timeline of launching this fall with an expanded program of what we currently offer. So this work started in January, as I shared before, with a work group. And that work group has been meeting regularly. That work group has also been working with other school districts, meeting with different stakeholder groups, with students, with parents, with leaders, hearing from different learning needs from the special education office, from the ESOL team, really thinking through many of the different perspectives, staffing, in order to think through what makes sense. We are sharing draft slides with a variety of stakeholder groups over this month and next month. And we will continue to enhance those slides based on your feedback. And then after we've really feel like we have a solid plan, we will begin to communicate outwards and collect some interest from families and students. So, really trying to understand, what is the interest level out there? Because that really then drives the next set of work around what does the program look like? What does the registration look like? Who's teaching these courses, hiring them, training them, and getting materials ready for the fall. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we want to make sure that we get this part right so that we have a successful launch that then we can build upon as we go forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who's going to share a little bit about the concepts and the models, the structure for the school. And as a reminder, for this webinar, we're really focusing on the high school program. So you'll see some stuff on the intermediate program, but we're not really going deep into that section, but it's all in the same slide deck. So you have that available to you. And there is a session later today for that if you do want to hear a little bit more about that. There's some differences between the programs. So we're going to focus on high school because there's a lot of components that I think you're going to be, have questions about that we should, make sure that we spend time addressing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
So good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you joining us this afternoon to hear more about some of the very early work that's been drafted thus far about the MCPS Virtual Academy. So the graphic that you see in front of you right now represents a high-level overview of what the Academy could look like based on the feedback and the discussion so far. Is thinking about the Academy in terms of two distinct programs or ideas of school. You have the intermediate school, and this would encompass grades 4 to 8, And we'll talk more specifically about some of the reasoning and rationale for combining the elementary and the middle school programs. And then the high school program for grades 9 to 12. And since this focus is much more on high school, I think it's important to note that we have a lot of really good bones in place for the high school program already to build upon from the work that's already been done around some of our local and regional online summer school experiences, the work that's done through IIS, as well as this last year and all the experiences that we've learned from. And so in thinking through the models that would make sense, we would have a high school program and an intermediate program. And you'll notice that each program is sort of segmented out based on some of the particular content areas, and that it would make sense to group those sort of the planning and the programming around those content areas. So math and science would be considered a program, and there would be some leadership to design that program and the needs of the courses and what that would look like for the students. Same thing with English and humanities, and then the arts and electives as well as CTE. So thinking about the structure of the instructional program across those larger buckets of content, it's also important to think about the teachers and the instructional staff that would be supporting those. And the reason these are sort of sideways that thread across those content areas is that in all likelihood, we would be looking at hiring staff that have the ability to teach or are certified in more than one area. So for example, a teacher that might be certified in not just mathematics, but also world languages. Because the program needs can vary, it will be important to be able to sort of use that staffing flexibly across the different contents. So you might have a teacher that's teaching an algebra course and maybe Spanish 1. So thinking through how that might work from a staffing perspective is going to be important, as well as from the instructional supports that are necessary. It should go without saying that throughout all of this, that we would be focusing on providing the level of services that students would need to be successful, everything from ESOL and special education, as well as those other wraparound services around social emotional learning, especially around counseling and case management. So there's, we know that there's much more to the instructional program than meets the eye, and making sure that the program itself takes all of those things into consideration to help students be successful. Including even the registration process and the enrollment process. There's still a lot of logistics. And so thinking about the academy as distinct programs for high school versus intermediate will allow that planning to happen and really, sort of drill into what are the needs of the high school students as opposed to the middle and elementary. Underpinning the entire program would be the notion of high quality instructional technology and instructional design. How do we use the tools and the materials that we have at our disposal to implement high quality and rigorous instructional experiences that leverage technology? It doesn't just happen by accident. It's really, a keen focus on the professional learning and building the capacity of those staff. And again, we have lots of really good examples to point to from this past year and even in prior years with how we use technology in meaningful ways to support instruction. So making sure that the program needs are met through the types of technologies that we're providing and the types of experiences that we're guiding students through, because a guiding thread across all of the discussions and even conversations with external individuals is the extent to which online learning and virtual learning is distinctly different than learning in a traditional classroom setting. And so we'd want to make sure that the professional development and the instructional models are in place to support that. So this, again, just sort of a high level concept of what the program would look like if we think about it from the perspective of an intermediate school and a high school with many of the technology pieces underpinning it. So the other component, or one of the other components that we want to talk specifically about, are what are the ways in which students would be able to interact and engage with the virtual academy based on their enrollment in, in their grade level or their enrollment in the intermediate school as opposed to the high school. So we thought about it in three distinct buckets. Supplemental being those experiences that students can participate in that happen beyond the school day. So it's not necessarily a concurrent enrollment, but it's a student seeking additional opportunities for learning. Potentially there's a computer science course or activity or club that they would want to participate in that the virtual academy is leading. Could they involve themselves in that outside the school day, whether that be early in the morning or in the afternoon and evening? For our high school program specifically, we also want to understand the notion of a part-time enrollment as opposed to a full-time enrollment. And so part-time students would have the ability to either add courses or substitute courses. And you'll see the table below in this graphic sort of outlines what that might look like. So if we take part-time from the notion of adding courses, we think about traditionally the idea of a 8th period or a 9th period, depending on the number of courses that a student is adding in addition to their actual coursework. So in this sense, they would be enrolled in the virtual academy. They would attend their homeschool for all of their courses, and then they might have 1 or 2 additional courses that they're participating in with the virtual academy that happen outside of the traditional school schedule. So in the mornings or in the evenings. That's a little bit different than the notion of course substitution, where students would be participating in some courses in their homeschool, and there would be others that they would be participating in through the virtual academy. And during their schedule at their homeschool would have either a study period or a block in which they go to a physical space to work. However, they're working on their virtual academy courses and content, and they could do other courses, but that would be a time that would be dedicated in their schedule to do that. And then any live instruction or synchronous instruction would take place outside of that school, those school hours in the evenings or in the mornings prior to the traditional school schedule. So that's sort of how to think about the part-time. The last piece around course substitution is we've got really good models to point to around the Edison program, where students may be enrolled in 3 courses. So that would be effectively half of their schedule, where half time they're with their homeschool completing courses, and then the other half there would be with the virtual academy. And we would look at being able to implement in the same way we do with Edison, with having blocks, whether that be a morning or an afternoon block where they participate with their homeschool versus the virtual academy. The final option, just to point out for high school, would be the full-time enrollment, where a student would be completing all of their courses through the virtual academy. So it would only be a concurrent enrollment in the sense that they have a base or a home school. However, all of the courses that they are engaging in would be through the virtual academy. And this is where we think of more such as 4 or more courses at the high school level. And again, this is just through the discussions and the conversations and the initial planning of the work group and many of the other things that we've been discussing so far. So this sort of gives you a sort of high level overview of sort of how the students would be able to be enrolled and or participate in the virtual academy as a high school student. But you can see if you wanted to learn more about the intermediate school, you'll see that sort of teased out there. That as of right now, the thinking is that students in the intermediate grades 4 to 8 there wouldn't be the idea of a part-time enrollment. They could participate supplementally or they would be fully enrolled. It would not be a part-time in some capacity, just given the nature of their courses. We believe that that's still up for debate if there's strong thinking and energy around reconsidering that. And so that's where we would look to you and others to sort of frame how we might adjust and tweak the models thus far. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brian, who's going to talk more specifically about the instructional models and the types of experiences student would be participating in.
Thanks, Matt. So Matt explained kind of the broader scope of how courses may be scheduled within the virtual academy. Within each course, we also need to consider what the instructional model looks like for students. So we've kind of shown you a continuum here from fully synchronous to fully asynchronous, and we believe that all of the courses that are within the virtual academy would fit one of these buckets here, right? Because these are really the only experiences that you can have as a student. So we have the fully synchronous model where the instruction is happening very similar to what it would be in a brick and mortar, just in a virtual space. So classes would meet 4 or 5 times a week with homework provided, afterwards to prepare or to reinforce students for what either they've done or what's coming next. We don't foresee a great volume of our courses falling into this particular bucket, but there may be some use cases for it. We feel that the next 2 models are probably where the majority of the courses in high school are going to fall, either synchronous blended or asynchronous blended. And they're really 2 sides of the fence of the blended model. So our synchronous blended model has more synchronous meetings, so 2 or 3 times a week of synchronous instruction that are where asynchronous learning experiences are provided for students in between those meetings. This is really a scenario where the synchronous instruction provides the basis for the learning experience. And then on the other side of that same fence is the asynchronous blended model, where a strong asynchronous experience provides the basis for the learning, and then the synchronous instruction, which happens 1 or 2 times per week in this model, provides support. It provides preview, review, opportunities for student engagement in dialogue, in collaboration, so in unscrambling confusion, pieces like that within this asynchronous blended model. And then finally over to the completely asynchronous model, which is no required synchronous experience at all. There is a facilitator of each course, and that facilitator does provide asynchronous feedback to students, but there's no really assigned time when that student is required to meet with that facilitator. We don't foresee this use case being frequent, but there may be some courses in which this is the appropriate model, and some students for whom this is an appropriate course, appropriate model for individual courses. And so we wanted to kind of talk about what we envision being the primary learning experience or possible learning experiences for students in each of those models that Matt talked about. So within our supplemental model, we foresee that there may be a scenario where a student may take a course in any one of those 4 instructional models. So fully synchronous all the way through to fully asynchronous. There may be a use case for any of those things within our supplemental program. Same thing in the part-time program. So students who are part-time may take, depending upon how many courses they take with us, courses within any of those models. For our full-time students though, we don't foresee any scenario where a student who is full-time with us takes all of their courses in a fully synchronous model. That doesn't really seem to meet any real need that we've seen at this point, and we don't foresee there being any students who are full-time with the Virtual Academy who take a fully asynchronous course load. We don't think that's the best model either, and so for those students who are full-time, they're really going to fall in those blended synchronous or blended asynchronous models of instruction. So we just wanted to kind of clarify and specify within each of those within each of those buckets of students what their learning experiences would look like. And I'll kick it back to Kara.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that we wanted to phase this work in, partly because we want to obviously make sure that we have the important conversations and collaborate on solutions across different components of this work, and also because of the time of year. We know that particularly at the high school level, the articulation process and scheduling process starts in November. And so really, engaging in this in April, May, and June is quite, it could be quite disruptive. And that is something that we absolutely do not want to introduce, particularly this year, as we've all been working really hard under a lot of challenging and changing conditions. So we've been very mindful to propose phases that minimize that disruption to the master schedule, that complement the articulation process that's already in place at the high school level, and hopefully allows for more time for collaboration and communication around how this might work. So phase 1 is really we'll start this fall, and you will see that it focuses on a continuation of the current services and an expansion of the current services. So as we mentioned at the beginning, we already do have virtual school services for credit recovery, for IIS K-12. We have specific course needs, grade improvement, health and technology. So those will continue. And we actually see those expanding to kids that that really have an interest in this, particularly after this last year. We also want to focus on the expansion to grades 4 through 8. So we know that we do have families that have said that the virtual program has benefited their children, or for a variety of reasons, their children may prefer a virtual school option. So really looking at grades 4 through 8, where that really has not been a pervasive model for those kids. And then really we see a lot of potential around expanding the supplemental courses. These are the courses that are offered beyond the school day, so they do not disrupt the school schedule. They're supplemental, so they're in addition to the high school regular course taking process. So if kids would like to take an additional AP course or an elective, or whatever they'd like to do, double up on something, they could certainly do that by engaging in a supplemental program, and also expanding the supplemental program to be not just academic. So looking at engaging in an instrumental music course, or looking at a certification of some sort with coding or elsewhere, creative writing. So really taking a look at the supplemental opportunities for kids to engage in the virtual academy beyond the day. Phase 2 starts to get into some of the work you saw that Brian really highlighted and Matt highlighted around replacing courses during the school day. So how can students attend the virtual academy during the school day for 1, 2, or more courses? So whether it's 1 or 2 classes as a class replacement or substitution, an example of that would be, I would like to take Italian, but Italian is not offered at my local high school. Instead of taking a foreign language at my local high school, I would like to enroll in the virtual academy for 1 class period to take Italian. The way that we envision that working is that the high school student would go to their comprehensive high school, but they would be assigned 1 period of a study period where they would then engage in the asynchronous materials of that Italian class. And then their synchronous classes would be beyond the school day, potentially. So again, there is a disruption to the school program, and that's where we want to make sure that we're thoughtful and collaborative around how that might look and how that might work. Again, the AM PM block is also sort of that part-time enrollment during the school day. So again, phasing that in with the articulation process seems to make a lot of sense. And then phase 3 is to really come back around and take a look at grades 4 through 8. Again, look at part-time for 4 through 8. Does that make sense? Does it not make sense? How might that work? And also revisit pre-K through grade 3, and make sure that we've really thought about all of the different opportunities that could be available that make sense, and layer those in as well. So that's our proposed phase in. Again, everything that we're sharing is really open for lots of input, feedback, and consideration. And this is where you're going to provide us your feedback. So you guys have been super quiet so far. So you do have the Q&A, and we're here to think through some of your questions, and some of the things we might have some clarification on. But a lot of it we're going to ask you to weigh in the feedback form. And so 2 questions that have come up as a result of the sharing has been, should there be criteria for enrollment in the virtual school? So can anyone enroll? Can anyone enroll full-time? Should there be any criteria at all for that? Like, what would that application or registration process look like in terms of criteria? Another question that has really come up across a number of these meetings is, what if we have, 1 or 2% of the population wanting this? That is, thousands of children immediately, right? So what happens then? And you can think through a lot of implications of, what happens to staffing and what happens to, scheduling these kids. But can we accommodate it? Should we try to accommodate it? Those are really big questions. And so if we anticipate a large volume of interest, should we prioritize, who enrolls and what might that criteria look like for prioritizing who's allowed to, who takes priority for enrolling in the virtual school? I do want to share the staffing element. We are not looking to outsource staffing. So we know that there are a lot of MCPS teachers that would love to teach particularly in the supplemental program beyond the school day, so it's in they teach and then teach in the afternoon and evening. We also are looking at how we creatively partner with schools that have high interest in doing this. But I do want to make sure that I say this and that you hear us saying that we will not be impacting your staffing models. So please know that this plan and the phasing in of the plan and the implementation of the plan does not require touching your staffing models or your master schedule for that matter at this point. So I just want to make sure that we share that up front and make sure that you know that, because that has come up on a couple of occasions as well. So here's the link to the feedback form. You'll see these questions in there, as well as an opportunity for you to share thinking and considerations around the plan as a whole. So I'm going to pause there, and this is an opportunity. This is really what we had to share with you today. So this is an opportunity for you to ask us questions, and Matt and Brian, if there are other pieces to weigh in on, I'm going to go on mute and let you guys speak.
Thanks, Kara. So there was just one question, and it's one that we've received in both of the previous sessions as well, around the timeline for staffing the virtual school, and as soon as possible is going to be the answer, so that it gives us enough time to ensure that the staff is appropriately trained prior, or whoever is responsible for that, and then it limits the impact on potentially any movement of staff. So we're not going to try to snipe staff or anything like that. But if there are staff movements as a result of the virtual academy being built, we want to provide schools the most time to be able to address any staffing deficiencies as a result of that. So as soon as possible is the answer, and we don't have a concrete date. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add on that, Kara or Matt.
No, I think, we have some more collaboration and some stakeholder sessions that we'll be visiting for the remainder of this week, and then after spring break for sure. Then we'll feel more comfortable having a solid plan that can be presented to the Board of Ed. That represents all stakeholder engagement and interests, and then we'll be able to go there. So this is really a preview into some draft thinking, but with a very real launch date of the fall, which does involve hiring, but to what extent, again, we don't know, only because we have yet to survey the broader interest, and we have yet to really solidify the phases in the program until we really elicit more feedback. So we will stay on the webinar here and answer any additional questions that you may have. But this, we also want to honor your time, and we want to say thank you for coming. I know, it's a busy week and a lot happening, and we just really appreciate you joining us and also taking the time to provide some feedback so that we can continue to iterate through the larger vision of the program. So we'll stay here, but we just want to say thank you for joining us. And if you have no questions, then we hope you really enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Damon.
Thank you everyone for joining.